Hello everyone, welcome to another review from me, Alan. Today I'm going to be looking at Desperate Measures, a Flames of War version 3 supplement about tank battles for Eastern Germany. This is a late war book, as denoted by the tiny little L at the top. And you've got this stuff on the back, the usual. I'm here to look at the book for you, so I'm not really going to go into too much detail on this. Just a little side note, I was really sick last week. That's why I didn't make any uploads of any kind. But I shall be getting right back in the swing of things with at least one new video a week every Tuesday. So, with that out of the way, let's get to the actual book itself. So, you got a little bit of history at the beginning. Obviously, now this book is split into two parts. So whether you're a Soviet player or a German player, you will have something here for you. In fact, I recommend this book for new Soviet players above everything else. Because, you know what? I'll get to my thoughts about it at the end. For now, let's look through the lists. So, you've got the standard Red Army Tankovy Battalion, which is a standard tank company. You can take it as a Guards Division or a Red Army Division. Red Armies are confident trained, and Guards Divisions are fearless trained, to represent the fact that Guards Divisions were that little bit more gung-ho about the Soviet Union. Though, as usual, Soviet tanks are cheap as chips. You can bring 10 T-34, model 1942, which has the smaller of the two guns, and limited vision, which no longer applies in version 4, for 39 points a tank, which is barely more than a Chi-Ha in the Japanese army. However, it should be noted that if you take from either Guards or Red Army, you must take all your items from Guards or Red Army. You cannot mix and match. And you get a standard weapons company, which is a tank rider company. These are the men and women who would jump on the back of a T-34, and just try and fend off anybody who tried to jump on top of the tank, because that was usually Germany's way of dealing with heavily armored tanks early in the war. This represents them dismounted, so they would get off their tanks before battle and move in as standard infantry. They all get machine guns, and they're still pretty cheap. Only 305 points for standard confident trained. And then you have anti-aircraft guns, standard. And then you get a Motorsofly battalion, which is a mechanized company. So this isn't mechanized in the way an American or a German company would be mechanized, because these just represent mechanized troops, the way the Soviets had them. As I mentioned, they would ride into battle on tanks. Or not even ride into battle, but ride to the battle on tanks, and then the tanks would go do their own thing, and this would help out. They're decently well trained usually, as far as Soviet troops went at least. I think it's just more the fact that Soviet took so many losses that they'd never really get any veteran troops. And you get standard support options for the Soviet Union: machine guns, mortars, anti-tank guns, standard Soviet fare. I don't really play Soviet Union, so I can't really tell you how good this is. I did just get my first little starter bit of an army, so maybe I'll be able to tell you a little bit better about the future, but for now it's kind of just theory hammer for me. But as far as theory hammer goes, the Soviets just bring so much stuff that it's hard to imagine that they have any trouble doing anything, especially with the new morale rules. Sorry, I'm still a little sniffly. I get sick a lot. I've noticed that, just recording these videos. You get an actual motorized unit, which is a reconnaissance platoon, where you bring transports, and of course, Soviets being Soviets in this game, you have reconnaissance in force. Still pretty cheap for reconnaissance, though. And they're fearless trained, even if you're just using normal Red Army. You can also bring some motorcycles, which I just think is cool, and submachine guns, which is about the same as a rifle, I do believe. Oh no, you get standard SMG units in your rifle instead of rifles in these motorized battalions, so that must be the difference. But you can also bring Panzerfaust SMGs, one per team. So basically replacing your command squads, quote unquote. Mortars, big old units of artillery, which isn't nearly as good as it used to be, but in direct fire, those are pretty damn good. And then you get the... Oh boy, am I going to have fun with this one. Serdy Samhai Ohanda Artillerinsky Polk, which is apparently a medium self-propelled assault gun company. Or regiment. Polk is regiment. That's interesting. Anyway, you get the standard little choice of Su-85s, Su-85Ms, or Su-100s. All led by a T-34-85, and again available in Guards or Standard Red Army units. This just generally isn't what I came to look at, so that's why I'm kind of skimming past it real quick. But you do get one of my favorite weapons of the war, the Noble Katusha. And not just for the song. And you also get corps support in the forms of saddle hulks and lots more artillery guns and big old units of anti-aircraft guns. And then you get the closing in history and the rules for humans. All the Soviet soldiers were humans, I should note that right now. Heroes of the Soviet Union, where you get luckier, smarter, sharper. Basically, you don't have head and chicks, and your units are veterans, except for the fact they're still hit on 3s. Which is, I don't know, I really like it. I like it because it makes the units a lot more expensive, so this really suits a beginning Soviet army. So you're basically paying the same amount for 4 T-34s as you would be for 10 T-34s non-hero. I mean, that does sound like it kind of sucks, and I totally am on board with that. But the fact that you can actually start a Soviet army without having to spend money upon money upon money. Trust me, I've got I play East Germans in Team Yankee. I've barely got 64 points of East Germans, and that's with 32 points of Soviet allies. With 32 points of East Germans, you bring, I think I have 20 tanks, plus infantry, plus air support. And the Soviets have the exact same problem. You're taking 20, 30, 40, 50 tanks instead of your opponent bringing like 5 panzers. And that's his whole list. And then you get your little tank rider platoons. Again, reflecting the fact that you only have a few. I do wish they just honestly have some veteran, formations. I know they have veteran units, but I wish they'd have some veteran formations for the Soviet Union. Just to make it that much easier to collect them. Then you get the Hero Motorized Battalion, Motorovsky. And you do get your SMG teams and such. And again, they're normal units, basically. Other than the huge, insane, screw off, we are the Soviet Union sized units. You get your standard. You do still get to bring a lot of machine guns, and you get to bring quite a few anti-tank guns, at least compared to what I've seen as Germany, Finland. And you get little reconnaissance platoons, and you get little weapons platoons of armored cars and tiny little motorcycle sections, and it's all very cute. And you get big old Zis guns still, because they're, actually artillery is much better, because you use the veteran skill. So I guess that makes sense. And finally, you get possibly one of the best things to start an army, which is the Hero Tank Killer. So you can bring just a few Su-100s, and that'll be your whole force, basically, which I find quite nice. And then you get your support options, which are hero or non-hero, and still part of Guards or Red Army. So for the big old units, IS-2s. Those will be your big hitters of the Soviet Union, at least on paper. And same with ISU 152s. They're all really good. You do get a Hero Spetsnaz platoon. Spetsnaz are the only Soviet Union, as far as I'm aware, unit to be fearless veterans. You also get heavy guns, or heavy Katyushas, regular Pioneer units, Hero Sappers, tank destroyers, howitzers, anti-aircraft guns. You get a lot of stuff. And then you get the standard arsenal. And overall, I recommend this for beginning Soviet players, for the simple reason of you can have a small hero army, as opposed to, bringing tens of units. Like, I faced that problem looking at early war Soviets, is that everything's just filled in so many numbers, you can't keep up with it, especially as a new player. So if you're a new player, love the Soviet Union, go for it. This is definitely a book for you. 10 out of 10 would recommend. As usual, you got a little painting guide, seeing how your soldiers are supposed to be painted. I would personally recommend not painting the stubble on your women soldiers, but that's just me. Maybe you would like to do that. More power to you. And you get whitewashing techniques. Don't use it in filmmaking, only use it for Soviet vehicles. And then you get into Operation Solace and all the German special rules. So I'm going to jump right in by saying that they lose a lot of their special rules in these lists. So things are generally cheaper. However, they have Enjoy the War, which means every model passes its, or not necessarily every model, but like every infantry stand and every tank model passes its own morale test separately from the main unit. And I think that's quite exciting. And I also just do love the Panzerkampf group, just its insane amount of variety. So I'm just going to list off the tanks you can use for the HQ. You can have a Panther, you can have a Jagdpanther, you can have a Panzer IV, you can have a Panzer 470, which is a tank destroyer. You can have a Panzer 470V, another tank destroyer. You can have a Jagdpanzer V or a Stug V, both tank destroyers. Stug G late, or a Hetzer. That's just your HQ unit. And you can choose it to be either Confident Veteran or Confident Trained. Confident Trained, obviously, you see a lot more points back for your cash. And then you get, again, the exact same giant list of units you can bring for each of the combat platoons. You can also use a Butte Panzer Company, or Butte Panzer Platoon. Butte Panzer Zug, as far as I'm aware from playing East Germans, where you can bring 5 T-34 Model 1942s if you are a veteran unit. And they're based, well, T-34s are really good tanks, being honest, so I don't see why you wouldn't bring them. Because that's pretty cheap for 5 tanks, as far as Germans are concerned. And then you get a Panzer Grenadier Kampf Group. The Kampf Group thing basically means this is what High Command can put together for you. Take it and try and win. It's, using, 3 units from Rommel's old group, and 2 tanks from this old group from Army Group South, and these 4 Hungarian tanks that managed to survive the battle. Just throw those all together and hurl them at the enemy. Let's try and stop the Red Army, at least for a few days. Now, you don't get a ton of different options like you do with the remarkably gigantic tanks, but that's because Panzer Grenadiers were pretty uniform. However, you can replace your the half-track in your HQ with a 2cm half-track, which is a slight anti-tank unit. Not really anti-tank, more anti, other half-tracks. And it's pretty good at its job. And you can have normal Panzer Grenadiers, or what were these guys? These guys are Panzersturm, so they get assault rifles. These guys are just standard Panzer Grenadiers, which means they get Panzerfaust MG teams. Now, they are all pretty expensive, because Panzerfaust MGs are really nice, and so are Panzerfaust assault rifles. Because you're basically just getting, high rate of fire, and anti-tank weapons. Can't really beat that. You can also bring cannon platoon, which is a nice little anti-tank unit. And most of it's in the support, which we'll see at the end of the book. You can also bring the same 1 or 2 panzer units and a butte panzer unit. But here is my favorite thing, the Panzer's Allblungs. These are tank schools, as I previously mentioned. And I'm not saying if you have a Girls und Panzer themed German army, you have to play as a Panzer Allblungs. But you should. Because that's basically what happens in that anime. And this is basically a bunch of German students who rode out to protect their school from the evil Red Army, and then, against everything that narrative would want us to believe, got their butts handed to them and were quite quickly crushed. The only ones that really survived were the ones who faced the Americans because they were allowed to surrender. The Soviet Union didn't really have a lot of mercy left for Germans at this point, but it's kind of understandable. They lost 1/3 of their population. Anyway, that slightly depressing side note apart, you can bring a Panther, a Panzer IV, a Panzer III, a Stug or a Jagdpanzer, or a Hitzer. Basically, these are the remnants of everything, and you can only bring them as confident train. Because you're leading teenagers into combat, of course you're only doing it at confident train. Expect these people to be veterans? Your teenagers are not better than the Soviet Union's crack troops, I'm sorry to tell you. But you can choose from Panzer IVs, Stug Gs, Hetzers, or Panthers for your main units. But you can also bring 1 unit of Panzer IIs or Brumbars in your formation. So that's really nice. And then you can also have a Panzer Allblungs Achtung 500, which is a heavy tank force, replacement heavy tank force. And with that you can bring King Tigers, Tiger 1s, Panthers, and that's it. Just those 3. And you get them all incredibly cheaply. I mean, barely over 200 points for a King Tiger. I don't think you can find a better deal around. You can also bring a unit of Panzer IIIs, which is a nice old tank that's not really up to snuff in late war, but, you know, you're dealing with teenagers. You gotta draw some lines. Their big thing is they don't get any German special rules, but with all the nerfs to German special rules there have been in version 4, I would say these are absolutely worth their points still. Especially bringing big units of Tigers and big units of King Tigers. Support them. It's quite nice. And then you also get the Panzer Grenadier school platoon, where you can choose to bring them from mechanized schools, which is like engineering schools and such. Or, you know, the Auto Club and such. Pioneer schools, which I assume is some sort of recon school. Maybe they have a background in the Hitler Youth. And then sniper schools, which I assume basically are just common troops taught a little bit better. They're not really great at sniping. They just can be pinned down and still kind of keep their cool when it comes to shooting off their rifles. But especially on this page, you can see how different the points cost is. 1 King Tiger here is 345 points for a confident veteran one, and over here it is 235 points. So you are bringing about 1/3 more King Tigers as a school group than as a actual army group. You can also bring various types of support, including reconnaissance that involves Panzer 38Ts, which were seized from Czechoslovakia way back when. And you can bring various pioneer groups, or again, more Panzer IIs or 38Ts. Yeah, again, those tanks were seized from Czechoslovakia in 38. So that just puts a note about how old they are at this point. Then you get some standard German support, Volksgrenadiers, some anti-aircraft guns. Surprisingly, you can bring some open top stuff too, as a motorized artillery. rocket launchers, stuff like that, usual German support stuff. And you can also bring some sporadic air support. Really, the Luftwaffe wasn't doing much at this point of the war. The Soviets kind of owned the air, at least where the Anglo-American allies did not. Also bring dirt cheap anti-aircraft guns, and you can bring the Stuka Ace, Rudel. I'm not really going to get into his special rules because I'm pretty sure they changed pretty drastically at the end of version, or at the beginning of version 4. So I assume they're not great. Now we get into the arsenal. The big thing here is that the school group tanks are over here, so don't use these ones. Use these ones. These ones are all unreliable because they've been using these tanks for training for years, so they're not going to really be up to par. And you get a little German painting guide, including different uniforms. Honestly, I would recommend the white uniforms myself, but that's just a personal preference because I do love the look of winter camo. You also get different camo schemes, though I would honestly say you can probably color your tanks whatever you want. Well, I would argue that normally, because they're your models. I don't care if I'm facing a bunch of pink tanks with little bunny ears on them, because they're your models. They should make you happy above all things. But if you are looking for historically accurate ones, they're there for you, though I would still argue that you can probably add a bit more flair if you're bringing a Panzer Albungs unit, because they were students and because German camo at the time was always applied in field. You would never have this is how you went out of the factory. You'd have that drab color, and you were expected to paint over in the field. So I'm not sure if this actually happened historically, but if you're a 17, 18, 19-year-old going into combat, I can't imagine that anybody would be too angry with you if you didn't follow the exact color schemes that the Wehrmacht laid out for you. So I'm just saying, you could probably get away with a bit more there than you could most places. And that's the end of the book. So what do I think of it? Well, I believe that for the beginning German player, or beginning Soviet player, is definitely a recommend. Now, however, for the German player, I believe it's a little more tricky than that, because these units are cheap, which means you have to field a lot of tanks. Even if you're doing King Tigers, you're going to be fielding 10 tanks still, and with the cost of a King Tiger, it gets up there, it gets over $100. So I'd recommend it to beginning Soviet players and advanced German players. Or, if you simply like the flavor of making a bunch of teenagers fight to the death, I approve that for you, you sick person. And I think that kind of sums up how I feel. It's a good book overall. I definitely recommend it for its price point, at least the one I got it at, which was $20 US. I believe it's very good value for that. It's got a lot of lists, and I would certainly take it over something like Fighting First, which is much thinner and has much worse lists, even though it looks a little thicker. That's only because it's in hardback. You can really see it when you turn it to the side like this. Yeah. So, if you're looking at getting into late war, I would definitely go for that one. Now, if you have an existing Allied force and want to play Soviets with that, I recommend the Digital Berlin book, because that has a bunch of lists for Sherman units in the Soviet Union that are also hero units, so you won't be paying too much for them. Basically, you'll be able to play with your American tank army, but on the side of the Soviet Union instead. Sorry about that. I think that's pretty cool. So, this book, if you're getting into Soviets, this book, if you've already got some Germans, Digital Berlin, if you are getting into Soviets from Americans or British. And that sums up my review. I am trying to be a little bit more professional with it than I was over my last review, so I hope you guys approve. But, as usual, leave me a like if you liked it. Leave me a dislike if you disliked it. Leave me a comment. Give me your feedback on this new format. I'm going to try to put all these videos into their own playlists, separate from the main ones. That way you can kind of look through them. And I hope to see you guys on the next video. Bye-bye.